We are right at 6 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started with this evening's presentation. So first off, welcome to all the attendees. Good evening. My name is Jared Counterman. I'm the Associate Director of Student Resources at Colorado State University Global. Part of my role and responsibility here is to oversee the career services and the writing center services that we provide to you all. I'm pleased to welcome you to the CSU Global's Marketing Career Success webinar series this year with our current guest speaker this evening, Kelsea Little, Head of Brand Storytelling at GoFundMe. We have a great program for you today, and I'm excited to begin this evening's discussion. First, I do want to cover just a few housekeeping items though. Please note this session will be recorded and all registered attendees will receive a recorded version of this after the event. Also, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a chat button. Right now, I'd love for everybody to introduce themselves, tell us where you're zooming in from, share your major or your job, share what inspires you to be creative or why you're just here, or just feel free to just say hello as well. Just remember to select all panelists and attendees from that drop-down menu. Finally, at the bottom of your screen, you'll also see a Q&A button. At any time during the presentation that you have a question, go ahead and feel free to submit that there. And we'll make sure to answer as many of those as possible during this session, time permitted, of course. And we can always follow up with anybody afterwards if you'd like. With that, I would like to introduce my co-host for this evening, Dr. LeeAnn Walker. Dr. Walker has 25 years of professional experience in marketing, with 11 being directly in higher education. Her corporate experience includes advertising, graphic design, corporate branding, social media for both for-profit and non-for-profit organizations. She's provided marketing and design support for national and international organizations, such as civil engineering, architectural design, transportation, professional sports, healthcare, and product manufacturing. Currently, she is the marketing program director overseeing the undergraduate marketing and graduate marketing certificate programs at CSU Global. Many of you on the call probably already know Dr. Walker, so please use the chat and join me in welcoming Dr. LeeAnn Walker.
Thank you, Jared. What a wonderful introduction and kicking us off tonight. I'm so excited about this speaker series because I think it's important for students to hear from professionals in the field, sharing their journey and their transitions into marketing. It seems fitting tonight to build on previous webinars to talk about brand storytelling. I know I'm a fan as well. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest speaker tonight. Kelsea Little is a storyteller with heart. Since joining GoFundMe in early 2013, she's helped build the company's editorial strategy from the ground up. That's exciting. I look forward to hearing about that. Whether it's coordinating live events, producing video documentaries, or rallying online communities around a cause, Kelsea believes that stories have the power to move us to action. She is also the host, creator, and producer of GoFundMe's podcast. So let's make sure we share that information in the chat so people can tune in. It's called True Stories of Good People and interviews everyday heroes around the world who are working to positively impact their communities and improve the lives of their fellow humans. So with that, I'm going to welcome Kelsea to the stage. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to be her slide turner this evening. So bear with me when she tells me next. And here we go. Everybody see the screen okay?
I can see it.
Perfect.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, LeeAnn and Jared, and for being my slide turner. I really appreciate that. I was having some Zoom issues, but hello, everyone, and just thank you so much for having me today. This is a real honor. As LeeAnn mentioned, my name is Kelsea Little, and I'm head of brand storytelling at GoFundMe. And I've laid out my presentation today to kind of take you through my career history to what I'm doing now, and I've peppered in some tips and advice along the way based on things that I've just learned throughout my career journey. And I'm super happy to answer any questions that you might have at the end. So just intro slide here, just a little bit about me before I dive into career stuff. I'm an almost lifelong resident of San Diego. Fun fact though, I was actually born in Fort Collins, Colorado. I know your school's global, but it's pretty nearby to where your headquarters is, I believe. But I grew up here in California and I love it so much. I got my first tattoo of California. It's pretty basic, but I like it. No regrets. And I live here with my husband and dog, who you see in that photo there. And outside of work, I love cooking. I'm like a minimalist in possessions, except for cookbooks. I have like 70. It's a real problem. And I'm also a singer-songwriter, and I play the harp, which you see in the third photo there. So I actually thought I was going to study harp in college. I got accepted into a program at Redlands University, but I ended up changing my mind and I studied literature and writing instead at UCSD. And I actually planned originally to get a master's in creative nonfiction writing. And I actually got into my dream grad school program at Mills College, but I was too afraid of the debt. So I entered the workforce instead. But again, no regrets because it led to like the most amazing career that I never even imagined. Last preface thing, I did a 6-month internship at Bridgepoint Education, which is a for-profit university here in San Diego, right after I graduated. It was in their policy and implementation department. And just as a side note, I would absolutely recommend doing an internship if you're newer to the workforce, as long as it's paid. And just because as a fresh graduate, it was such a useful way to familiarize myself with like the corporate world, with what it takes to be in a business and team setting, when it's like to report to a boss, like how to receive feedback, interview skills, like all that stuff. So if you have that opportunity, I would say take it. Next slide, please. So yeah, as that internship was drawing to a close, I started looking for job opportunities on Craigslist, throwback. We actually used to do that in the writing and editing section. And I found a listing for a little startup called GoFundMe. It was located right here in San Diego. Those are the two founders, co-founders, Brad and Andy. And they were looking for customer happiness agents. And I was really intrigued by the job title. The job description was even better. It was captivating, it was fun, it was clever. But above all, I really connected with the company's mission of helping people. And so I applied. I got an email back the same day. I went in for an interview, I think that week, and I was offered the job like before I left the building. And I share that not to make it sound like it's just that easy, because it absolutely does not happen like that most of the time. But it was just one of those real like kismet life moments where I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And I'm just so grateful for it every day because it's been such a special ride. So when I joined GoFundMe in May of 2013, it was a true startup. That's me and my GoFundMe classmates on our very first day. The company was 15 people in a super small office space. And there was actually no comms or marketing department when I started. It was just customer happiness, which is what we call support, and product. And then the founders did everything else. Now we're over 400 people, even bigger than that group photo on the right from like a couple years ago. We have offices all over the world, and I've been lucky enough to kind of grow my career alongside the company's growth, which has been an amazing experience. But looking back though, I'm really grateful that I started my career at GoFundMe in our customer support department. Because it just gave me the foundational knowledge of what our customers actually go through and like what their pain points are and what it's like for them emotionally to be using GoFundMe at these tough times in their life. And that's actually some solid advice I would give to any marketer. Next slide. I believe that the very best marketing is created with the customer in mind. Just too often, I think we can get excited by like creative ideas. Like creative is good and it's necessary and it's fun, but like if it's missing that truth for your customers and their actual experiences, it's not going to resonate. It's not going to help your business. I just think it's critical to really understand who your customer is, what they're going through, what those emotional or mental struggles they might be facing when your messaging is actually going to be reaching them. And just the more you can empathize with your customers and draw some real insights from their lives and experiences, just the better informed you will be as you put together your just marketing strategy and messaging. So as soon as I got to GoFundMe, I told anyone who would listen to me that I was really good at writing and editing, and like, please let me know if anything comes up that they need my help with. And in the meantime, I took it upon myself to do like a full audit of our website on my own time to discover any like typos or grammatical errors, and sent that to our founders. And I'm really happy that didn't like annoy them or anything. I was just trying to show initiative, you know, and from there, I slowly started to get writing assignments tossed my way. And then about 10 months in, one of our co-founders, Brad, gave me like a special assignment, which turned out to be somewhat of a test. If you want to go to the next slide. So they asked me to create content for a brand new section of the website that was going to highlight strong stories and press coverage about GoFundMe, kind of dating back to the company's founding in 2010. This is what our press page looks like now. It's not the one that I created like 8 years ago. It looked much more primitive and pretty terrible, but had some great content. And so for this assignment, I was given a pretty tight deadline, but I had a feeling that it might lead to new opportunities. So I went to like a coffee shop for a few hours before work for a week or two and just like gave it my all. And super happy that Brad was pleased with my work. And this led to my first promotion ever in my life, which was a super exciting moment. So I was given this trial role as GoFundMe storyteller. And then 6 months later, I moved into a permanent role as GoFundMe's first ever media director, where I basically offloaded all of the marketing and comms responsibilities from our co-founders, because like as the company grows, even when I started, I don't know how they were doing all of that. He would like do webcam interviews with reporters in between like doing product reviews and design stuff. And it was just like, they're amazing. Next slide, please. So my tip from that experience and other experiences that I've had in my career is always be the squeaky wheel. Like if you have talents or strengths that aren't being utilized in your current role, you need to make sure that the right people know about that. I've observed, you know, that pay off for people a lot of times. And just the reality is when new opportunities arise, you know, in your company, you're likely not going to be in the room where that conversation's taking place. But if someone in that room knows that you have a particular strength to bring to the table that would serve this opportunity, your name is just much more likely to come up in that conversation. So yeah, in the early days of GoFundMe, our primary marketing strategy was simple but super effective. And so the goal was to get local media placements of successful GoFundMe stories. And so kind of when I offloaded all these responsibilities from our founders, I was overseeing 3 PR firms who were tasked with pitching reporters in targeted regions. Now we've got an amazing in-house comms team, and shout out to Maddie, who is here in person, and she's one of those amazing people. And I also ran our Facebook and Twitter pages, and we sent out like a weekly GoFundMe stories roundup newsletter. So it was early days, and you don't really need to be much more complicated than that with your marketing strategy, but it's been really cool to see how that's evolved as the company has evolved. Next slide, please. So GoFundMe really started to take off the following year after a couple of big crisis moments. After the Boston bombings, for example, almost every survivor had a GoFundMe started for them. And their stories were featured in like every major news publication, of course. And the GoFundMe story specifically had this like really big People magazine spread, and like now we're mentioned in People like probably every week, but at that time that was like a huge deal, and you could see the direct spike in traffic to our website as a result of stories like that. And we just started to get a crazy amount of news coverage, and it painted the GoFundMe brand in such like a helpful and important light. You know, it was just like a pretty simple but easy message to understand. It's like something happens in the world, people want to help, and that help happens on GoFundMe. And simple but effective again. And behind the scenes, we were working to push this narrative just as much as possible via comms and social media. And it just helped grow our business so much in those early years. And as GoFundMe grew, so did our team. The founders sold the company in 2015, and we brought on a whole new executive team who started to hire some really amazing talent to take GoFundMe to the next level. And they hired a VP of comms who was to be my new boss. And it turned out to be the person on the next slide. It was Dan Pfeiffer, he's the co-host of Pod Save America and the former senior advisor to President Obama. And so my first thought was, I guess I'm getting fired now. It's like, how can I support this man's comm strategy? But no, he was actually a really amazing mentor and leader, and he started to build out just an amazing team of really talented comms professionals. And I was genuinely excited to have the opportunity to expand the talent on our team and learn from folks with way more experience than myself. Next slide, please. So just my advice for, this is going to happen in your career at every company. People are going to get hired above you. Your team's going to expand. There's going to be, new peers. It's just a normal thing that happens. But just something I've witnessed, and I think it's important. There's just absolutely no benefit in being territorial in the workplace. I've only seen it create problems and friction. So just as much as you can, when stuff like that happens, be confident in what you bring to the table, have a collaborative attitude, work to lift others up where you can, and just remember that change is inevitable, and having a healthy attitude for it is just really beneficial mindset to keep always. Next slide, please. So in 2017, I just like think about it sometimes, like, how is that real? But I got the opportunity to go help open GoFundMe's 2 international comms offices, our first international offices in London and Paris. It's like a Netflix show or something. It's ridiculous. So I lived over there for 6 months and helped establish our offices, interview for country managers, conducted market research on how kind of each country viewed fundraising and online crowdfunding. It's different everywhere. And just like what the competitive landscape really looks like. And that was a really fascinating experience as, someone in like the comms and marketing world. I just learned a lot about how to launch a business in a brand new market, and kind of saw the importance of storytelling, like not just at a product level, but at like a brand or like company level as well. So in France, for example, we had a lot stacked against us when we launched there. The crowdfunding market is actually quite crowded in France, and was when we got there. And there was like a very clear favorite amongst our competitors. And what's more, Paris is essentially the Silicon Valley of Europe, and they really love their homegrown businesses a lot. And they're especially supportive of women-founded companies. So as it turned out, our biggest French competitor, it's a site called Litchi, is a woman-founded company, and the company was born in Paris. So, we met a lot of challenges there, and it was interesting to work through those and see how we shape our messaging differently in one country versus another. And I just learned, again, that storytelling is just so important at that brand and company level, in addition to like what you're offering as a product. Next slide, please. So when I got back from my 6-month stint in Europe, I would say that's where my current role really started to take shape. And that was when I pitched the idea of a GoFundMe podcast to my boss, Dan. Luckily, he was also like in the podcast world, so I didn't have to convince him that much that it was a good idea. But I was able to secure a small budget to produce like a test season. And I had never made a podcast before, so I just got to work learning everything that I needed to know in order to make it happen. And I happened to be traveling to Seattle shortly after the podcast got approved to support one of our GoFundMe organizers who we were doing like a little mini doc about. So I figured we would just double up and have him be our first podcast guest. That's him in that first photo. His name is Jeff Liu, and he's known as the Lunch Debt Dad. I don't know if you remember that story, but he learned about lunch debt, that like if kids can't pay for their school lunches, that debt like carries over to the next school year. And like if they can't pay it, or if their families are struggling, they'll just like dump their hot food in the trash in front of like the whole schoolroom. It's horrible. And so he learned about this, or they'll like replace it with a cheese sandwich and milk, or just something really sad to like shame the kids. And he was like, that's not right. So Jeff first raised money on GoFundMe to pay off the lunch debt at his son's school, and then for the whole district. And then he started one for like Washington State, and he inspired like new GoFundMe starts across the country for people to address this in their own communities. And so it was just, it made sense to have him be our first guest because he's so amazing. So yeah, we named the show. Oh, that's also Sean Astin was in season 1 of our podcast. I have no idea how, but that's him in the middle. That was like a cool life moment. But we named the show True Stories of Good People and produced 12 episodes up front. And we premiered it in July 2018. And we kind of released an episode per week across the next couple of months. And it was really exciting. The show charted on iTunes on its very first day, and we started to get positive reviews coming in. And just by all accounts, it was a success. And I was able to secure an annual budget to produce an episode every week. And I think we've done like 130 or something at this point. If you want to go to the next slide, please. So my tip from this story is, and I give this advice a lot, just like be entrepreneurial. Don't sit on that brilliant idea that you've been mulling over. I just don't think there's any harm in putting together a pitch, showing it to the people who need to see it, and kind of getting them to dream with you and use it, you know, a little bit of like influencing tactics there. And you're not always going to get a yes right away, of course, but I believe that speaking your idea out loud is the first step toward making it a reality. And even if you get a no, it might plant a seed that might turn into something else cool. But at the very least, you'll start to become known as someone who brings a unique perspective to the table. And that's just a really valuable thing in general. We could talk for a long time about like developing your personal brand at work, but just don't sit on that great idea. Someone needs to hear it. Next slide, please. So I spent 2019 traveling the US and interviewing GoFundMe's most inspiring users. And it was just such a profoundly amazing experience. Like, had to work really hard to like keep it together a lot in these interviews because like these stories are just so rich and powerful. And I really miss being in person with people doing the interviews because it's just such a, I just think podcasting is such a beautifully intimate form of storytelling and just letting those stories shine. But that experience really gave me the opportunity to hone in my interviewing and storytelling skills, just doing so many back-to-back. And yeah, I just love podcasts as a brand storytelling medium, like I just said, because it lets the customer story lead and leaves kind of less room for us as the brand to like over editorialize or just make it work for us, which I think does a disservice to people's stories a lot of the time. And well, despite that though, there's a real skill though in being a strong interviewer, and that's something that I've been able to hone throughout this process. And I would definitely recommend just looking into to how you can shape that as a marketer. What I learned is I put a lot of effort into making my guests feel safe and comfortable enough to open up and be vulnerable with me, because that's a lot to ask of someone. And so always try to be extremely kind and empathetic. But you also have to craft your questions, you know, when you're doing your research in a way that to take, if you're podcasting, to take the listener through a story arc in a way that's going to make sense to them. But at the same time, you also have to be an active listener and know when to like drill deeper into a response, or, you know, just look for like verbal cues for like when something isn't landing, or like if the conversation's like turning in another direction. So yeah, I just think interviewing, it's helped me in all other facets of marketing, having this like foundational set of skills. So just recommend looking into maybe how you can play around with that. Next slide, please. So in 2019, we merged the podcast with one of our other owned editorial programs called GoFundMe Heroes. And I started to kind of oversee all of these programs as a whole. So in addition to producing a weekly podcast, we also had a very story-based recognition program called GoFundMe Hero of the Month, where we would do a write-up and sometimes a video feature about someone who's using the platform to spread kindness in the world. And we started having all of our Heroes of the Month on the podcast as well, and eventually built out this custom central hub for all GoFundMe Heroes content called the GoFundMe Heroes Hub. But you can see it pictured here. And if you want to go to the next slide, we can see an actual story page. So for the very first time, people could come to one central location to read GoFundMe Hero stories. You can stream the podcast right from this page. You can watch videos. You can donate to the causes, and you can share the content on social. So really kind of tying all these different channels together and bringing them in more cohesively. So my tip for this on the next slide is just always be thinking strategically. You know, are there like multiple efforts going on across the marketing organization or just your company as a whole that could maybe be effectively tied together and strengthen everything? Or, you know, is there a gap in the strategy that your project could help address, you know, if it was expanded or pivoted a little bit? That's just something, a pitfall that I've fallen into before is I have all these passion projects, but you have to work pretty actively to not let them become like these little siloed things that just are like fun to do, but not actually supporting the strategy at all. So as much as you can, just always be thinking strategically. Next slide, please. So in November 2019, we snuck it in right before the pandemic. We held our first ever public facing live event called the GoFundMe Hero Celebration. And we asked our community to submit nominations of who they thought were GoFundMe heroes. We got over 2,500 submissions, and myself and an internal committee narrowed down to 5 finalists. And we flew them out to San Francisco and in front of an audience of 200 fellow changemakers, philanthropists, community heroes. They were honored with the distinction of GoFundMe Hero of the Year and kind of delivered accepted speeches. Oh, I should have grabbed it, but on every seat in the audience, we had GoFundMe branded tissues, which is my favorite thing we've ever done still. And they said like, it's okay to have feelings. And like by the end of the night, everyone was actually using them. And it was just like the coolest thing ever. And this was just one of the most fun and exciting projects of my whole career. I hope we get to do it again. I got to learn so many new things. My role on this event was the production side of things. So I project managed 5 professionally produced mini docs with different crews just in the local areas of where our heroes lived. And they kind of aired before the heroes came up on stage and gave their speeches. I also had to create this really complicated, it hurt my brain so much, this run of show spreadsheet for the in-house production crew at the venue with all of the music, lighting, and media cues. And I ended up being, they didn't tell me this until I got there that day, but I ended up being the one to actually have to call those live cues on the headset system, like during the live show. I had a heart attack when I got there and we had like a billion other things to do. And they were like, oh, you're doing that, right? I was like, I've never done that, but it went great and it was exhilarating. And we also did our first ever roundtable podcast interview that morning of the event with all of our heroes in one room. It was just a pretty magical day. So next slide, my tip from that experience and just lots of experiences in my career, it is okay to learn on the job. Like you can do it. I used to feel a lot of imposter syndrome, which I'll talk more about toward the end, because I didn't actually study marketing or comms in school. I've learned everything I know about these fields on the job and by teaching myself from learning from other extremely smart and talented people. So this used to cause me a lot of self-doubt, but I now kind of find it empowering actually. And I think marketing is such an exciting field because it's ever evolving and it gives us the opportunity to be lifelong learners. And just if you need an outside voice to tell you, like, you're more than capable of figuring out how to do something that you don't have experience with. You know, when you're faced with these situations, and you will be, just try to feel confident in your ability to figure it out and, you know, take excitement in the fact that you're going to be learning a new skill that you didn't have before. And, you know, you can get certifications and study and do all that stuff. And that stuff is great, but real world on the job experience, just for me, has been incredibly valuable in my career. Next slide, please. So that brings us to today and my role as head of brand storytelling. So I'm still overseeing the GoFundMe Heroes program and hosting our podcast. And now with our new CMO, Musa Tariq, who got here in January of this year, he's kind of our first marketing leader at GoFundMe who really believes in brand building. And so I finally have like the resources and executive buy-in that I've always dreamed about to kind of take these programs to the next level. So just last month, we launched a dream partnership with the social impact media company Upworthy. You've probably seen like a video in your Facebook feed from them that just is like designed to make you have feelings and have happy tears or restore your faith in humanity. And along with Studio 368, which is Casey Neistat's creator collective and production house based in New York. So it's kind of a tri-partnership, and we're working together across those teams to amplify GoFundMe hero stories on like a massive scale for the first time, and are just starting to tell them in really unique ways through the lens of you know, different platforms or through creators even. Next slide, please. So my days lately consist, and this is more of our partnership landing page, but I'll drop the link in the chat later because it's just kind of cool to poke around. But yeah, my days lately consist of essentially project managing this partnership. I've never owned a project with so many stakeholders before, so that's been a learning curve for me. It takes a lot of balance and communication to make sure everyone is bought in, informed, and involved, and, you know, kept up to speed. For example, when we used to choose the GoFundMe stories for a Hero of the Month feature before we had this partnership, there were only 2 decision makers. It was myself and our comms team person who pitches the GoFundMe hero stories. It was just literally like, do you think this one's great? Yes. All right, let's go with it. But now I need to get buy-in and approval on a single story selection from Upworthy's working team, which is like 10 people who all have vested interests. Like, will it resonate with their social audiences? Will it translate well to digital video? Like, what kind of existing media assets do we have to work with, etc. And then also from Studio 368, who we're producing these films with. And so their concerns are like, what are the visual elements of the story? Are they strong enough for a full in-person video shoot? Is the subject of the video strong enough on camera? And so lots to consider when making a decision now that used to be a lot more simple. So that's been a fun challenge. Next slide, please. And then it's also my responsibility to continually be evaluating the partnership strategy and looking for ways that we can improve it. For example, if we're producing written articles for our heroes, but that's not the primary place of amplification on our social posts anymore, like, do we need to be using those creative resources, or could they be better spent elsewhere? Or on the partnership landing page, are enough people submitting their GoFundMes for consideration to receive the $500 donations that we're offering to kindness-based GoFundMe campaigns? If not, why not? You know, how do we need to reshape our messaging and our amplification strategy to kind of get people to take that action? So my day-to-day job is essentially a lot of creative ideation, strategy planning, reviewing what works and what doesn't, and pivoting where necessary to make our efforts stronger moving forward. But at my core, I consider myself a storyteller. And I really view it as such an extreme privilege and gift that I get to bring inspiring stories to as many people as possible with just the very simple goal of inspiring more kindness in the world. It's like the best job ever. So my next slide and my learning from that experience is find a job where you love what you do and a company whose mission that you align with. It's not always sunshine and rainbows. Like, I've been at GoFundMe for like 8.5 years for a reason. I love it. It's not always like, you know, easy, or there are like tough times that you have to get through. But if you, at the end of the day, like feel like you can come to work and feel proud of what you do and like you're making a difference, you know, if that's something important to you, then I think it makes all the tough times like all the more worth it. Next slide, please. So lastly, I mentioned this a bit ago, but I just wanted to touch on imposter syndrome, which I mentioned a little bit ago. So imposter syndrome is loosely defined as doubting your abilities and feeling like a fraud. I think we all experience this at some point in our careers, and I will tell you that I experience it on a regular basis, whether it's not having a marketing background, but calling myself a marketer, being in the marketing field, or comparing myself to someone else's progress or career or skill set, or just plain doubting my strengths that I know are strengths. Imposter syndrome is just, it's very real and it sucks, just plain and simple. Next slide, please. But I just wanted to share an experience that I had recently that has helped my imposter syndrome unlike anything else in my entire career. And it's now advice that I just want to give to everyone. So my CMO, Musa, encouraged me recently to put myself out there on LinkedIn and offer myself as a mentor because he knew that was a goal of mine. I was really nervous to do so and was honestly skeptical that I would get any responses and thought that would be really embarrassing if that happened. But the post ended up going viral. It's actually how I met LeeAnn. Oh, pretty cool. And I got over 100 DMs of people wanting to have mentor chats. I was truly and honestly flabbergasted. But I decided to do something crazy and attempt to meet with everyone at least one time. And so far I've had over 60 like one-on-one chats with marketers and comms folks from all over the world at all stages of their career. And I just have to tell you that I went into these conversations like so nervous, honestly, that I wouldn't be able to answer their questions or provide any value, or we just like get stuck and I'd be like, why am I doing this? But I was emboldened to discover that actually I do have something to bring to the table in these conversations and was able to provide a unique perspective and value to our chats. And so my point in sharing this is that we all have strengths to bring to the table, obviously, and we all have something to learn from and teach each other. So my tip on the next slide. So you'll likely experience imposter syndrome at some point in your careers, and you'll doubt yourself from time to time. It's natural. But my best tip for addressing this in a real way is find a mentor and be a mentor. I never thought mentorship was, I don't know, it's just such like a nebulous concept, and it just puts, it's like, how do you get started? But mentors don't have to be like this, rigid thing, or like it's, you have to like ask the question and have them say yes, and then you're like locked in for a certain amount of time. It's really just at the end of the day, someone you trust, someone you can be like radically honest with, and someone who can help you talk through tough situations. And when I looked back, I realized that I've had a lot of people play a mentor role in my life, even though it wasn't like anointed as such. So, find someone that you admire and you trust, and see if they'd be willing to have those chats with you, and then become a mentor for yourself, for real. Like, you don't have to wait until you're at a certain level, which I used to believe. Even if you're in your first year of a job, you would be such a valuable mentor to someone like in their final years of school. It can happen at all levels. And so, just mentorship can be just a really beautiful symbiotic relationship, and can just lead to really amazing organic community building. Next slide, please. So just lastly, so many of the folks that I met in these conversations through that LinkedIn post was just asking me like if I'm going to do anything with it or do anything next. So I created a LinkedIn group called Storytellers in Marketing, and it is such a wonderful group of people. And I just love to end this by inviting anyone who would like to join the group. We just have discussion topics. We do like video meetups, just talk through challenges all together. And even if that's not right for you, just whatever you can do to start meeting other marketers and having conversations and being generous with your time and ideas, starting to build a community around you. I have had this experience. Like, I promise it will lead to some like really cool moments that you wouldn't have expected. And it'll, I think, boost your confidence at the same time. So next slide, it's my last slide. Thank you so much. That's kind of my career history and what I do now, my day-to-day, and just things I've learned. But I'm really honored to have been invited to speak today, and happy to answer questions. But just thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much. What a great presentation. I'm going to stop sharing screen now so that we can begin to look at some of these questions. But before we get to the questions, I took a ton of notes myself. And I love that GoFundMe saw your potential, and you started in a role and you continued to grow and evolve because they invested in you. And I think that that says a lot about an organization that doesn't negate what you haven't done, for what you could do. So I thought that was really, really impressive. One of the other things that we love to preach in a marketing program is understanding budgets. Did you find that understanding how to put together a budget for some of these events that you did was kind of important for you?
Yes. Like I like gulped when you said so like I'll just be the first to say that things like, I mean, budgeting out so much, I could figure that out, but like that and like data and analytics is just like not my strong suit, and something that I like every review that I do on things that I want to work on and get better at, like those are some of those things. But yeah, budgeting, especially for that big event that we did. Musa, our current CMO, wasn't here yet, so we really, our core team who put that event together had to really work hard to get exec buy-in, because we just didn't have that like brand marketing vision at the top yet. And so yeah, that was a real learning process, and just even figuring out things like negotiating with vendors, or like you know, if we were having unexpected costs come up that we didn't plan for, like where do we need to cut corners on other things, like do we really need like that like extra trade pass appetizer that we were going to send out or something like that, or just yeah, it's important though. And it's important because especially for larger budgets, like those aren't things that are going to fly under the radar. Like you're going to have to answer questions about that, and be able to you know, be informed about that when you're asked. So that's definitely something to always be on top of. Yes.
Well, I hope the marketing students have heard that, because that is one of the things that I hear the most grunts about is, why do I have to do this? It's very important. That's why. I know that we talked about, you know, being a storyteller. For somebody who uses GoFundMe and they're not strong storytellers, but they do need the platform for help, what advice would you give them? Because we've seen some posts that just blow up and go viral. And then we've seen some where the story is really good and it's very heartfelt, but it doesn't go anywhere. What advice would you have for someone that's in that situation?
Yeah, definitely. So there are absolutely some best practices for you know, being a successful GoFundMe campaign organizer, and it's multifaceted. So the first part is that you know, at the end of the day, GoFundMe is a storytelling platform. So before you can share, you know, that donate button on your page, you need to write your story, and it's really critical to kind of paint a picture of the situation. And I think the most compelling GoFundMe's that I see, you know, paint the whole picture, not just like, I need this right now for this. It's like, you know, who are you? You know, where are you from? Like, what do you do? Like, you put yourself in there as well. And then just put a structure around the fundraising need, and really make it clear to people why this cause means so much to you, and just kind of, yeah, bring people into the story as much as possible, and try and get them to, you know, feel those emotions that you're feeling around this fundraising cause. And that's just really, at the end of the day, like what compels people to donate to something. And then I think storytelling on GoFundMe doesn't end, you know, once you press the publish button and your fundraiser's live. You really have to share it with your networks at that point. I think a lot of people have the misconception that you start your GoFundMe and then there are just like kind, generous people looking at the website trying to find, you know, fundraisers to donate to, and just largely that's not the case. The vast majority of donations on GoFundMe come from personal friends and family of the organizer or of the beneficiary. And so it's really critical to, you know, think about where you can reach your community most effectively. Is that on Facebook, or, you know, do you talk to people more on Instagram, or, you know, are there like 5 or 10 really close friends who you could actually send a direct text message to, or call, and get them to like be those first supporters and help you share and expand your network. And so yeah, it's we've got a lot of great resources on the website for best practices, and I'm really interested in trying to, you know, help people access those more and become better storytellers so they can reach their goals.
That's good and helpful information to know that there are those resources for people. Okay, so let's get to some of these questions. We have a lot of them. We may not have time for all of them, but we will try to get through as many as possible. So Kelsey said she majored in literature and had planned to go into creative writing. Do you think that helped you prepare for this role? And do you think people working in branding need to be creative in that way?
I love this question. Yes, so now looking back and kind of working through that imposter syndrome that I, you know, was talking about like not having studied marketing and learning on the job, I think, okay, so like, especially in the US, liberal arts degrees just get such a bad rap. I don't know what that, like when I was growing up, it was just like, why are you going to study writing? Like, what's that for? But, you know, yeah, looking back, literature and writing really gave me the foundational elements that I needed to understand storytelling and how to, you know, translate a message in written form, and you know, that can extend to so many different forms of media and marketing. At the end of the day, it's like you're trying to convey a message to people and reach people on an emotional level and understand like their psychology of like when you're going to be reaching them and what they're feeling, and just applying like, you know, a mix of like psychology and human emotion and writing and storytelling. And so I definitely think that it set me up well. And I feel like marketing as a whole, especially after having all these conversations with different marketers from different sectors and from all over the world, like it sounds like most people are thinking that brands and brand marketing are moving so much towards storytelling. And I just think that's a skill set that's going to be needed and craved for more moving forward. And yeah, I think it's just makes you a more well-rounded storyteller. Like even marketing, it seems like can become so siloed and specific. Like for some reason you think you don't need to be a strong storyteller if you're like a performance marketer. But I would argue that it would only help strengthen your strategies there. So yeah, storytelling is super important, and it will help you be a better marketer, I think.
Well, they do say content is king. So have good content and it'll draw people in.
I agree.
So when looking to get a foot in the door with a company or organization, how direct should someone be about about setting intentions to want to grow within the company? I think you touched on this. Your organization was newer when you started, and now it's kind of blossomed and grown. So how do you set that practice with intentions in the beginning?
That's a great question. So I think if the company is newer, you know, and they're on like a good trajectory already, I think growing with the company is sort of implied. Like that's like a great, just a great place to be in. And also do your due diligence as an interviewee when you're looking for a job. Like you can ask questions in the interview too at the end, and like try and get a sense of if the company is, you know, committed to, you know, helping its hires grow and develop professionally, and just how they view that. Like it's a two-sided street a little bit. But I think, you know, like if you're in the interview stage, like I think you can, you know, show up as a candidate who is really excited to learn and grow with the company, and that, you know, that would even show your commitment to want to like stay there for a while, which is valuable to companies. But the thing I would caution, and what I've seen maybe be a drawback for people before, is not being willing to like put in the time in the role that they were hired for, and trying to just like get hired and then jump right to the next thing. That is maybe not the best way to go. So be committed to the role that you're hired for, but, you know, be willing and committed to, you know, put in the time there. But like I said, like when you get there, see what other opportunities are available and just express your interest, you know, to your manager, to the people who need to hear it. And, you know, if it's a newer company and they're growing, hopefully you might get the opportunity to start to dabble in something new, and that could turn into a a new role down the road.
Yeah, that's some great advice, definitely. So I really like this question because a lot of us struggle with work-life balance. It's a hot topic in just about every industry. And usually it's stress related, but for you, it sounds like there's high emotions at stake. Our students want to know, how do you refresh and build yourself from that high emotion?
That is such a great question. That's so true. Like, we talk about that. If Maddie's still here, she'll know that that is a thing about this job. I think it's in any comms job, but specifically at GoFundMe, it's so true. We like, I think a common self-care tactic that regular people have, or people, is just like to unplug from the news cycle for a while, and just like take care of your mental and emotional health, and not feel like the weight of the world on your shoulders. But sometimes I can feel that way at a company that's so plugged in to the daily news cycle, and like, if there's a crisis within the hour, there's a huge uptick in activity on GoFundMe of people starting campaigns to help with that. And so it's really important to take time to refresh. And me specifically, as my role as a storyteller, or like a podcast host, I get really invested in the stories, and being in a like intimate storytelling setting, and hearing people's stories live, and like I mentioned before, like they'll drive me to like tear up pretty frequently. And so how do I refresh? I mean, to to be quite honest, I need to be better at it, but what I like to do is just try and give myself, the permission and the space to unplug and dive into other creative things that I find fulfilling. And that's really helpful for me, I think, just in life, but even coming back to work feeling refreshed. It's like, use this another creative part of your brain. Like I said, I like cooking. Every weekend I'll batch cook for the week for like 6 hours, and I'll try like new recipes every single time. And that's creative to me in a different way, like different problem solving, or I'll, play music, or write some songs. So that's what works for me, but different for everyone. But I think it's such an important thing to think about, because you can't show up as your best self to work if you're burnt out. So find whatever that thing is for you, and make an effort to do it, because it's so important.
That's great advice. Let's see. It sounds like GoFundMe has been really fulfilling for your workplace environment. Our students want to know, what is your favorite part or activity of your job?
Yeah, there's so many. So one really cool benefit that we have at GoFundMe is called GoFundMe Gives Back, and they've been doing it since I started there. And basically, every employee is able every single week to nominate a GoFundMe that they find on the website that really touches their heart, to receive like a grant or donation from the company. And I think we give away like millions of dollars every year. It's a lot. But every week they'll select an internal committee selects a bunch, and it's like free money to give away. It's just like so cool. And it you just feel like you're making, it's like $500 to $1,000, which, in passing might seem like a drop in the bucket, but when you see the comments or the emails back, it's just like means so much to people. So that's really cool. But at the end of the day, what's kept me here for so long is I just never dreamed that I could have a career that combines creativity that is really fulfilling in so many different ways, and just like impacting people's lives. Like, we'll launch those GoFundMe hero stories, like I was showing you with that Heroes Hub. We'll launch them in the morning, on a day, and like 4 hours later, they've like surpassed their goal, as a result of all these potential donors reading their story, being inspired, sharing it. And it's just that like perpetuation of kindness. Like it makes me feel so good. So that's my favorite part.
That's wonderful. So we have time for one more question. And I love this question because if you ask my 9-year-old daughter, she would tell you to stand out and be different, you have to be on TikTok. And I know that TikTok just launched TikTok resumes where people can differentiate themselves. So besides that tool that my daughter is fully on board with at 9, what are some ways or suggestions you would provide to someone who's looking to get into marketing to really stand out?
That's a great question. I hadn't somehow seen that. I've seen people use TikTok for resumes like in LinkedIn posts, but that's awesome. I'm not surprised that they did that. TikTok CMO Nick Tran came to speak to our marketing team a couple of months ago, and he was just like such a visionary. And I think stuff like that is awesome. Just like leaning into creativity and just, you know, new things that people are trying. Like that's brave, and I think that recruiters notice stuff like that. But something else that I would recommend, you know, as you go throughout your career, and even as you're starting it, it's this concept of like personal branding. And I have been able to develop that, I think, at GoFundMe, and now I'm, you know, trying to expand it just to like my personal brand as a professional in general. So I call myself a storyteller, like that's my brand. But I would encourage you to like think about what that is for you. And kind of the exercise that I did to try and find what word that was for myself and what I wanted to lean into is like, I wrote out a list of what my passions are, and then a list of what I think my strengths are. And I tried to see where like the overlap is. And that's what I started to lean into as my personal brand. And I built a website around that and just started showcasing my work there. It's just been really helpful for kind of attracting the opportunities that I'm interested in. And so I would just say, give it a go. And building a website just as like a thought exercise is really fun. And just thinking about how you want other people to think of you, and just how you want to authentically like show up in the world and at work. So yeah, just have fun with that.
Yeah, great advice. Well, that is our time for this evening. I wanted to thank Jared for being my co-host tonight, and also to Kelsey. It was a wonderful presentation. Everybody who registered tonight who couldn't make it will be receiving a link to the webinar tonight, and we will also be placing it on our career page. Kelsey, is it okay for people to connect with you on LinkedIn?
100%, yes. And if our little storytelling marketing group sounded interesting to you, just shoot me a DM and I'll send you an invite. Love to have you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Kelsey. It's been an honor to speak with you tonight. Great presentation.
Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you, LeeAnn.
Thank you for having me.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.